Hello, friends. Today we are trying something different. Welcome to Let Ali Show You. And with me is Mahmood OD, author, activist, Palestinian British. And we'll be talking about two main stories today. One is the prospective peace deal, Israeli cabinet approving phase one, the first phase of the Trump sponsored Gaza peace deal. And secondly, the clashes between Afghan Taliban and Pakistani security forces along the so-called Durand line that divides these two countries. But first, Mahmood, thank you so much. It's been a while since since we last spoke. The end, is it the end of 2 years of Israeli onslaught? Has this supposed massacre, what the UN Commission calls a genocide, come to an end, or are you still circumspect?
Well, there's so many things to calculate, to be honest with you. There are certain indications that this time is a little bit more serious than other times, but we still have a lot of problems. So, for example, this time there are more mediators. There's more involvement from Turkey this time. There are certain guarantees that we don't really know about. The Egyptians and the Qataris are pressing more. It appears to be that this attack that the United States conducted against Qatar had more momentum to these countries to add more leverage. Donald Trump, by his statements, and again, you need to put many lines by his statements, is showing more keenness, and he's talking about the end of the war, and he's talking about a long, everlasting peace, and he's talking about a great future for the Middle East and all of these things. So there's that bit. There's an agreement that has been signed, but we did understand also this agreement is only a first phase. There were two declarations. The first declaration came from the Israeli side. They said that we authorized the first phase of the war. From the Palestinian side, they say we were considering an ending of the war based on the outline of President Trump. So we clearly have a situation here. And by the way, it's a fact that the two sides, the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, signed two different agreements. There's an agreement that has been signed by Israel with the mediators, and an agreement signed by the Palestinians with the mediators. And Israel clearly had certain clauses in their agreement, and the Palestinians had certain clauses, which again complicates stuff. But this was the only formula that would have led to the reduction of tensions that some of the prisoners, some of the sides are saying will lead to the ending of the war. Now, and it's very interesting you're showing that video when the Israeli crowd was booing Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you have the bit where Steve Witkoff was speaking? By the way,
I have the Kushner soundbite here. Let's play that for our viewers, and then you can start. You can comment specifically on this, but I'll try to find the Witkoff file as well. So this is Jared.
I'll send you the link for Witkoff too. Okay.
Okay. So this is Jared Kushner speaking in Tel Aviv at the so-called Hostage Square, and let's listen to what he says, and then we'll continue with the conversation.
It was a shattering day. My wife and I were at a friend's wedding in Colorado, and I remember hearing the news, and I just went to the hotel room, and I was looking at videos and trying to speak to whoever I could to get information, and I just stayed there all night, and I cried. Seeing some of these acts that were committed on that day made me think about how fortunate we are to have a society with rules and laws and people with morals. And seeing these horrific, barbaric acts shocked me to my core in a way that I'll never be the same. Since then, my heart has not been complete. And it's been a tremendous burden that I felt to see these hostages come home. To see their families get the closure they deserve and to end this nightmare. and also to see the suffering end for the people in Gaza, who, for most of them, were experiencing this through no fault of their own, other than being born into a situation that was horrific. We're not going to celebrate tonight. We're going to celebrate on Monday when the phase one gets into conclusion. But what I did come here tonight to say was that I couldn't be more proud to see the way that the state of Israel and its people have carried themselves through this traumatic, unthinkable, horrific experience.
All right, he's going to continue.
Did you find that link? I sent you that link.
I got the link. I got the link. Let me share that tab instead, and I will play this out for the benefit of our viewers. So this is Steve Witkoff, U.S. Special Envoy for the Middle East, and he was speaking right either before or after Jared Kushner. Listen in.
Benjamin Netanyahu. Oh. Okay. To Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, let me just finish my thought. I was in the trenches, guys. Let me just finish my thought. I was in the trenches with the Prime Minister. Believe me, he was a very important part here. The Prime Minister and his staff, Ron Dermer included, have both sacrificed so much for this country and devoted their lives to the service of Israel. Their dedication to the history and destiny of this nation stands out tonight. They've given everything, their time.
Yeah, I'll just let that run in the background. Basically, Netanyahu was booed. It seems that Steve Witkoff was making more of an effort to stand up for Benjamin Netanyahu than the crowd was, which brings us to a question. How sincere are the Americans, or can the Americans be with this deal? And can something like this last if there is such a big gap between what the Israelis standing there are thinking or saying and what the Americans are pushing?
You see, that's the thing. This is where it gets really tricky. Number one, we can clearly see here that the American side was fully backing the genocide from the beginning. They have been covering up for Israel. They have been denying that Israel is committing a genocide. They have been supporting Israel with whatever it needs. They have been buying Israel with more time. They have been vetoing everything that's going against Israel. And they have been supporting this genocide in full ever since the beginning. On the other hand, there is no denying that there are certain disagreements between the American side and the Israeli side. That cannot be excluded from the fact that there are internal American problems too within the administration. The American administration isn't all in the same boat or on the same path with the Zionist lobby or the Israeli lobby in America with what Donald Trump is doing. And let's not forget one thing, which is, by the way, another primary reason why also Donald Trump tried to flex muscles and show some authority with the ceasefire deal, which is he is losing popularity in America. Donald Trump is primarily concerned about Donald Trump. If you listen to the MAGA crowd, right, to Trump supporters, real Trump supporters who voted for him, who campaigned for him, and who actually, and funny enough, by the way, still do, despite Donald Trump proving himself to be a very weak individual when it comes to Israel. He wanted to show them something that will say, listen, Trump put his foot down. He really did. He finally put his foot down. He needs to do that to himself. There are reasons to believe that he did apply a little bit more pressure now, because Benjamin Netanyahu didn't really want to get into this agreement. The reports were saying that he was swearing at Benjamin Netanyahu. He was saying things like, if you don't get into this deal, we're going to leave you. There's a White House official that was quoted a couple of days ago saying that Israel knows that without America, it doesn't exist. And Netanyahu was wise enough to realize that, and that's why he went into this agreement. And let's not forget one very important bit here, is that the United States administration, alongside the Western establishment in general, are interested in protecting and preserving Israel. When they were seeing that Benjamin Netanyahu was leading Israel by his actions into oblivion, they didn't want this momentum to continue. We started to have global leaders talking about a global army to go and liberate Palestine. Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't doing well in his campaign. Of course, there's the other aspect of it, the people suffering in Gaza, which is the main thing really, and why it was one of the reasons that the Palestinian side, in the form of the negotiators, of course, and the Palestinian resistance, did have certain compromises and did know that they are making a calculated bet here, knowing that Israel can backtrack later on this agreement. But then that happened for various reasons. And one of the main reasons this happened was because the card that was viewed as the most valuable card in the hands of the Palestinian resistance started to lose value with time, which is the card of the prisoners of war. They were dying anyway because of the Israeli starvation. The Israeli government officials, multiple government officials allied with Benjamin Netanyahu, said that it doesn't matter if these people go and die, because the priority is to eliminate Hamas and resettle in Gaza and ethnically cleanse the population. Something that's not going to happen by these images that you showed, hundreds of thousands going back to the north to destruction. But they're more than happy. They're over the moon, actually, the people of Gaza. So there is that, and there is also Donald Trump trying to preserve his image. There is pressure internally and externally that Benjamin Netanyahu was facing. Let's not forget that he wasn't doing well with this military campaign. It was full-blown genocide against the Palestinian people. On the ground, the Israeli forces were being humiliated. They weren't able to conduct any successful operations against the resistance. The only thing that they can do is more airstrikes against civilians. And wherever they were met with fire from the Palestinian resistance side, they would flee. So he was saving them in a way, by the way. Now, the fact that there's a first phase, regardless of all of these vulnerabilities and risks of the war starting again in full force, that is going to be another element of pressure against Netanyahu internally. Why? Because in previous rounds, when Israel had occupied certain parts in Gaza, they considered to be extremely strategic. For example, the Netzarim corridor. The Netzarim corridor is a part in the northern part of Gaza that splits the north from the south. When Israel occupied that part and were literally making it a death zone, killing everyone coming near it, Netanyahu at the time said, we're never going to withdraw from Netzarim. When the ceasefire took effect, they withdrew. After they tried to, by the way, not withdraw when they were already in the agreement. If you recall at the time, Israel started to say that, no, we're not going to leave Netzarim because the Palestinians are breaching. But then later, political pressure forced them to withdraw. when they wanted to go back and take it back, all of their soldiers were demoralized, like they were demoralized when they were forced to go back into other parts of Gaza they were in already 4 or 5 times, like Jabalia or Khan Yunis or these areas. Again, facing fierce resistance from the Palestinian resistance in those areas. Now that there is this momentum and the prisoners of war are back, supposedly the thing that Israel made as its big symbol of the war, although Netanyahu himself, by the way, in the beginning said that the aim is to eliminate Hamas and then release the prisoners of war. And then he started to change his tone again, you know, demilitarizing, remove them from power, and then, you know, bring the prisoners of war. Now, what is the state going to say and what is the army going to say when over 60% refuse conscription in Israel anyway? That's, in a way, is going to be more of a form of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, because they would say, well, we have them back now. We don't need to go in an all-out war. And we are risking the lives of soldiers anyway, because now they were telling them, the Israeli government, why are we risking the lives of these people? If you go through Hebrew media, for example, you will see people saying, why did we fight for 2 years then? Because not all of them are stupid. Of course, generally, it's a brainwashed society because they're the first victims of the Zionist enterprise anyway. But many people were asking, well, why didn't we have this deal 2 years ago? Because on the ground, Hamas offered them a deal 1 day after they began the operation. It was primarily led by the urge to release prisoners and hostages, the real ones, in Israeli prisons. After Israel started to starve them and kill them, literally sentence them to death without declaring so. So they were happy to make that deal. And why did they do it now? Netanyahu will come up with so many excuses. Oh, we hurt their military capabilities and we did this and that. But really and truly on the ground, up until the last second, you know, the Palestinian resistance was obliterating them. Up until the last second, they were running away from them. Plus, they're keeping the exact same reason, and they're giving the Palestinian side the same exact reason to continue the problems later on. How? By now, tampering with the lists that were received by the Palestinian side of names to be released, including heavy sentence Palestinian prisoners and even doctors in Gaza who have done nothing but remain steadfast in serving their people under this barbarism of Israel. And Netanyahu clearly wants to continue and have this tension so that he can expand it at any point, but he is also taking a strategic move by having other fronts open. So if he feels like he's compelled into going ahead with the later stages of this agreement, let's say, and there would be a long-term ceasefire in Gaza and a real deal, he still has the Lebanese front open. He still has the Syrian front open. He can still come up with an excuse to carry out more attacks against Yemen. And tomorrow he can say, we want to target Iran, because that clearly hasn't ended yet. And as a matter of fact, in Israel, they're saying we're getting ready for a multi-front war, a new arena now. That is dependent to a large extent on how Benjamin Netanyahu continues now with the coalition. Because what he's doing now is as follows. He is trying to make certain moves in his coalition now to diffuse the tensions that are taking place from his cabinet members and from his coalition. How? He's trying to soften the approach in relation to the conscription. That's one thing. He's trying to have certain financial reforms. He's basically trying to please everyone so that the coalition doesn't collapse. And by doing that, he thinks that he can buy himself more time. If he feels like he can buy himself more time, then, well, there is a chance of slight de-escalation. Because now he can clearly see that this illusion or delusion of the greater Israel isn't going to work. Because it failed in Gaza. It failed in supposedly the weakest point, which is proving to be the strongest point, by the way. It failed with 200,000 tons of TNT, a full-blown genocide, and a failed ethnic cleansing campaign. And let's not forget that they wanted to remove all of those people from Gaza. But that did not go ahead. So all of these things combined tell us a few things. They tell us, number one, that it's very, very volatile. It's risky. It's dangerous. There is a chance of something going ahead, but it's very risky because Israel always has these breaches, and they all are always treacherous with agreements. They have no respect to these things. Two, it could all of a sudden go back to square one, simply by, after Benjamin Netanyahu getting the prisoners of war, he ignores all of that pressure, all of that momentum, even if it's coming internally. And then he decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead anyway. Because if I don't go ahead, he might be facing resignation, an immediate resignation. Primarily from the coalitions of the religious Zionism and Jewish power, led by Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Or at least one of them. And if one of them resigns, the coalition collapses. And then he would have to go into early elections. And he wouldn't necessarily want it to go into early elections unless he feels like he is very safe and protected and has a very high likelihood of winning these early elections. And he would also need to count the time frame. So really and truly, we're in a very, very complicated situation where there is a lot of uncertainty. And regardless of the progress that's been happening, and at the end of the day, the people, that's the main thing, the people do need the relief, and the Palestinian delegation showed the necessary, flexibility, and have given the necessary compromise to show the people that, look what we're willing to go through to have a ceasefire, without, of course, crossing the red lines that they have no right to cross, by the way, anyway. And despite that, Israel is going back. And then they can be in an even worse position, by the way. But thankfully, what we're witnessing, by the way, from the global public opinion, what I have noticed is people are so aware. Like, it's unreal how people are aware now. They're not buying any of the nonsense. They're saying, no, we need to escalate actually the action and the protesting and the campaigning, because we don't really trust what these people are doing, and because it just happened several days back. We're not talking about a forgotten part of history. And that is one of the most important things moving forward, because all of the ones who are complicit, they want to save face, don't they? They want to show you that, look, I reached a ceasefire, and then I forced Israel to do so, and I did this and I did that, to hide their direct participation in, if not direct complicity, that's at a lower participation rate, in this genocide against the Palestinian people. That's, in short, the situation that we have here.
So much to talk about, Mahmood. You mentioned a few things that I want to get your attention to, and obviously this is all happening at a time when Pakistan and Afghanistan are having a border, intense fighting on their borders. Pakistan also had some role to play in the Trump formulation, at least, because we know the Pakistani Prime Minister, who is a representative of the military dictatorship, was one of 8 leaders with Trump and the Muslim leaders from Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, that were all part of this deal. And then later on, it emerged that the Pakistanis were saying, this is not the draft that was shown to us. The draft that Trump came out with, the 20 points and so on and so forth. The Pakistanis then backtracked and said, we have nothing to do with this. This is not what we signed up on. And then Trump came back again and he said, no, that's not true. You guys all agreed to this. So there seems to be some complicity and some duplicity in all of this. But before we get to that, who has won as a result of this agreement? Has Netanyahu been given a clean chit for the more than 60,000 killings that have taken place in Gaza? Or can he still be held accountable? Or has Hamas won a greater bargain out of all of this, despite 80% of Gaza being leveled? What kind of victory is this? Or is it a victory?
In military terms, you judge the party or the side that has been victorious based on one primary thing. Have they achieved their objectives or not? What were Israel's objectives in this war that is a genocide? It was number one, first and foremost, eliminating Hamas. Number two, returning their prisoners of war. And number three, making sure Gaza never poses a threat again. Should they have failed, and they have, in one or more of these objectives, that means they lost by military terms. Now, the people will come and say, well, what about the destruction? Well, what about the martyrs? That is a calculated move coming from Israel to cover up the military failure. Why was Israel telling us about the 1,200 Israelis and all of the propaganda and how many civilians died on the 7th of October and the regurgitated, recycled propaganda 24/7? To cover up the Israelis that Israel killed on October the 7th, the large chunk of the Israeli civilians, to make it be a large casualty event, and cover up the fact that the Palestinian resistance took down a whole army division in a matter of 40 minutes. So everyone needs to be aware of that. Therefore, judging by these measures, and every war is calculated based on the objectives of the war, did they win this war? No, that's just judging by this parameter. Then there are other things to take into consideration. Of course, the Palestinian side, they had immense losses. They lost everything material, over 70,000 martyrs at least, over 160,000 casualties, if not even more, destruction, all of these things happen. But they remained in their land. They prevented Israel from committing an ethnic cleansing campaign. They did not raise the white flag, and they did not give up their historical or contemporary rights. And they did that in a way, despite all of this destruction, that will amaze generations to come. The level of destruction in Gaza, if we want to compare it to other occasions in history, and by the way, that's not in a judgmental way. No, everyone is entitled to do what they want, as in, other nations or whatever it is, and there are different things to contextualize and take into perspective. But Japan, with the nuclear bombs that the United States landed, they basically surrendered with, if we want to equate the two, less than 2 to 1% of what Gaza suffered in terms of destruction per the area casualties per population. Yet the Palestinian people never gave up. And that will resonate for generations. Then let's talk for a second here about Israel's position in the world. The whole world saw a live stream genocide for 2 years. The whole world saw who the real terrorists are, who the war criminals are. They woke the whole world up. People started to dig into history. People started to criticize their own governments. People became aware of the complicity of their own establishments with Zionism. You've created a global revolution that isn't stopping. And they removed any legitimacy that was existing, by the way, based on falsehoods and propaganda anyway, from the global population. What they're trying to do now, as in Israel's allies, is the recycled and the regurgitated propaganda 24/7 to try and save Israel's image, as if they want to save Israel more than Netanyahu does, more than the leaders of Israel. So that's what we have now. The people who made their aggressor fail are the victorious. The people who fought up until the last second with a full blockade, with being backstabbed by everyone, almost, and neglected by everyone, almost, apart from the fronts that we know. For example, the Yemeni front was always open with the Palestinian side, and the other participation in certain periods from the Lebanese resistance or the Iraqi resistance or Iran directly going into the war after certain events. Apart from that, these people were starving, yet they continued to fight Israel up until the last second. And if you go and ask the people in Gaza, again, in their majority, they feel over the moon because they're going back to these places even. Because to them, they thought that they were never coming back. This population that consists of 73% refugees from way before October the 7th, 2023, by the way, Gaza is a very big refugee camp. Where do they come from? They come from historical occupied Palestine that was occupied in 1948 and then was later named Israel. Why are they refugees there? Because Israel doesn't allow them to go back. That explains why they resisted so fiercely, because they know their enemy very well. And they did not want to face another exodus and another ethnic cleansing again. That's why they're more than happy to return to rubble than being scattered all over the world, knowing for sure that Israel will not allow them to go back. And Israel, again, did all of this destruction and had all of this genocide to cover up these facts of a huge military failure, of a huge PR failure, and a huge failure to defeat the will of the Palestinian people. Don't forget, by all of these actions, Israel wanted to mentally and psychologically destroy the Palestinian people and anyone supporting the Palestinian cause, so that they can say it's a lost case, it's a lost scenario. They rose like the phoenix from underneath the ashes to face and confront their enemy and tell them, we are here. We are the owners of the land and we will remain on this land. You are the imposters. You are the fake entity with the pseudo history and the pseudo narrative, and we will remain here no matter what.
But remain to what? Look at the state of this place. It's completely destroyed.
They will rebuild it in no time. Trust me. All of this talk about taking 10, 20 years, all of that is, there are certain places already being completely removed with temporary housing for the population. The plan to rebuild Gaza, Egypt is already taking steps to rush it even further. And we're talking about between 4 to 5 years. They already have plans to use everything that has been destroyed, recycle it in certain other parts. There will be temporary housing that is much better than just temporary tents that the people are living in now. But first and foremost, we need to respect the desire of the people. If you go and ask the people, do you want to leave or do you want to remain and rebuild your country or your city? They will tell you, no, I want to go and remain. I saw people going back as if they're going back and they won everything. Although they literally lost everything, but they went back, for example, to the north as if it was heaven for them. Because they'll tell you, I want to smell the north of Gaza, for example. So all of that will be rebuilt. And also, don't forget, this was part of the psychological warfare, which doesn't really get enough mention. The psychological warfare that the Zionists have been conducting through their mouthpieces on mainstream media, on social media, or in the form of political stooges, whether in the West or the East, destroy the will of the people and in their hope of any life. What they forgot is that these people have more resilience and faith that they can distribute and open charities to distribute faith and resilience to the whole world. They really did not understand that from the Palestinian people. So if this goes ahead, and if this first phase does indeed lead to a second phase, if the mediators do actually press on the Israeli side, if the American administration genuinely applies more pressure on Netanyahu to continue, we could see this going ahead and succeeding. However, we need to be realistic and we need to be very cautious, because previously that hasn't worked. Yes, there are certain developments and certain things that happen on the ground now that give more indications of a better likelihood of it succeeding, but we cannot rule out the fact, which is as follows. There is a psychopathic serial killer nation state committing a genocide still in power. If you go and watch a program about a serial killer, and you'll go, oh my God, he killed so many people. Imagine someone having a state, a psychopathic, sociopath, mental, with weapons, going on a rampage. That's Israel. And that's Benjamin Netanyahu. That's what we have. So long as that entity exists in its form, it isn't dismantled as a supremacist, neo-colonialist entity of terror built on hate and discrimination and Jewish supremacy, we will continue to have a problem, whether the ceasefire lasts or not. And thankfully, the people are aware of that. If you go through the comment section, if you go and listen to the people online, social media, people are aware of that fact. And it's very important that it continues and that the pressure continues, because so long as they exist in that form, the next genocide will only be a matter of time.
I wanted to let you continue a little bit longer because we had a picture of Netanyahu with you as well. There, global complicity.
I can
Yeah,
I can
global complicity, and all obviously Monday. The deadline for this end of this phase one, as Jared Kushner also mentioned, is Monday, and we're expecting the 20 odd remaining live hostages to be returned, and we are expecting Palestinian hostages to be repatriated and returned back to their families as well. But what's the guarantee that once they have the hostages, their own people back, that they won't start bombing again, that they won't renege on this agreement, on this deal?
The guarantee is very weak. The guarantee is clearly just guarantees, talks. Again, how can you guarantee when there was no enforcement against this entity of terror? No one can guarantee, unless you showed me that you're willing to take action. And none of them have. These people who are guaranteeing. As a matter of fact, the United States is a participant. And let's not forget that Donald Trump was trying to have this shiny image in the hope of a Nobel Peace Prize that he didn't get now, but said that the person who got it was willing to give it to him, but he said no, But there is no guarantee. As a matter of fact, Israel is tampering now with the prisoner list. And the mediators are working to try and get this resolved. By how? Again, by applying pressure, by trying to apply pressure and tell him this and tell him that. So again, there are no real solid guarantees that this will go ahead, or if this does go ahead, that the Israelis will not go back and escalate for more genocide. The only thing that we can judge or include as a note here are the developments on the ground. Their military has been exhausted and defeated. It's a humiliated, exhausted military. A terror army that have faced so much fierce resistance in Gaza. Over 60% refusal to conscript in Israel. Many fleeing the country to avoid conscription and to join the army. They're not succeeding with the Orthodox community to recruit them in. The financial situation is in ruins. Many Israeli billionaires with their companies and their funds fled the country over a year ago. I'm not talking about now. Many multinational companies stopped trading with Israel. The embargo campaign started to escalate even further. And like I said, this could be the American rope to save Israel and buy it a little bit more time. Because what does America and the Western establishment usually do? They buy them time. Now, if it does go ahead, again, and Netanyahu feels like he can be protected with his government, he'll continue. But if not, it's not just Gaza, by the way. And this is what I wanted to talk to you about, what I can add on this point here. He has other fronts open. Yesterday, he started to intensify his attacks against Lebanon. He targeted an excavation location because he clearly doesn't have any military targets or anything as such, but he wants to provoke Lebanon more and more to a level where even the president of Lebanon himself, who is so tied with the American side, condemned Israel and asked them to apply pressure on Israel because Israel, according to him, wants to drag Lebanon and make it a continuation of Gaza with blood and fire 24/7. He has a Syrian front open where he's trying to have a civil war and divide the country and balkanize it. He has an open front with Iran. He unilaterally declared a ceasefire because he couldn't handle the missiles. But he, at any given moment, can go and carry out certain strikes in Iran in potentially a calculated way, not to attract an all-out war, because also the Iranian side will respond in a calculated manner too, but anyway, to protect himself politically. And why is all of that happening? Because the world has allowed a genocidal war criminal terrorist leading an entity of terror and supremacy of committing a genocide without enforcement. That's why. And guess what? So long as he's there, and anyone who replaces him, by the way, that risk would remain there. Because it wasn't about Netanyahu. It was about Israel. What Netanyahu did in the past 2 years is Israel summarized. Ethnic cleansing, genocide, barbarity, killing innocent people, all of these crimes that they committed, that's Israel for you. It's just that in 1948 and in 1967, it was easier to hide it. And now, although they tried so much, and they're still trying to, by buying more media outlets, by buying social media outlets to censor it, they haven't managed to censor it. Because the global population power was fiercer than their controlled media. So really and truly, so long as there is no concrete action to stop them as a country, nothing's going to happen. And leading us back to the agreement that you mentioned, you said that Pakistan criticized that wasn't only Pakistan that criticized. Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia criticized that too. Because when President Trump sat with the Arab and Muslim leaders in that meeting, that included the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan, and Indonesia, the draft was later amended by Netanyahu. So what they said was true. He did amend it. And as a matter of fact, he was asked not to publish it. But he did. He did because he was very interested in moving ahead for the Nobel Peace Prize thing, and also to reduce the pressure from within. America, you have a lot of people criticizing Donald Trump from the Republican side and from the conservative side and from the MAGA movement too. He wanted to show that, look, I'm putting my foot down against Netanyahu, because they're both narcissistic. They both really care about their image. Netanyahu might try and hide it a little bit more, but it's the same. He published it, but what later happened is they reached a formula where they could actually have an agreement with both sides to get the ball rolling. Because what some of the mediators were thinking of, and what Donald Trump was thinking of, is if we get the ball rolling with the initial phase, it's going to make it much more difficult for Netanyahu to return to the war. They had this belief. They thought if we start this ceasefire agreement, we think that it's going to be more difficult for Netanyahu Turkey will apply more pressure too. The Palestinian side asked them to be a mediator. The American and Israeli sides had a veto on the Turkish participation too. Pakistan had more participation from the outside, and they also had this defense pact with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia tried to have a preemptive measure because they knew that the greater Israel that Netanyahu is talking about is mostly Saudi Arabian territories. And they didn't want other countries to have this pact with. But nevertheless, we reached where we are now. The question is, will it last? No one has an answer to that. But it's very, very, very tricky. It's very dangerous. And Netanyahu is still there, in short. And the same country that committed this genocide is still equipped to commit another genocide.
And the Palestinians are, at least the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, is nowhere.
Mahmoud Abbas is out of the picture completely. Listen, so those who, that's why I really don't like anyone who condemns the Palestinian resistance from the beginning up until now. And anyone who tries to play on the 7th of October victim card, I despise these people. Because they swallowed the pill of Zionist propaganda and are regurgitating it without even going and analyzing anything. Like the facts that we know on the ground of the Israeli forces' massacres against the Israelis and the whole propaganda surrounding Al-Aqsa flood. Or what they say, October the 7th, and all of the nonsense that they speak about. If it wasn't for that, would anyone be talking about the Palestinian cause today? No one would be talking. Hardly anyone would be talking. You know, those who are interested and have a historical backing. And this man, the Palestinian president, he was condemning the Palestinian resistance. And as a matter of fact, he was blaming them for the genocide. Imagine how appalling you need to be to blame the people standing up on their own with bare feet, the most vicious and barbaric enemy that humanity has ever seen. That's assuming you consider them part of humanity, by the way. How dare you go and blame the Palestinian people? They conducted a legitimate act of resistance enshrined in international law and any law and common sense and human sense. Who are you? Then you blame them for the response and barbarity that is, well, no one can say it's even disproportionate. You know what it was. Blaming the Palestinians, who do you serve? And also, where is he now? The American administration didn't invite him to the UN. They banned him because they didn't give him a visa. The Israelis aren't even looking at him. They're saying we don't want a Palestinian Authority in Gaza or Hamas. We don't want anything, basically, because we don't want a Palestinian state. The only thing he's clinging on is, you know, the recognition of a Palestinian state, which is, again, more of a theatrical move rather than a practical one. Because with any recognition, you need action to follow. And so long as action doesn't follow, forget about it. Let alone the fact that it still protects and prolongs the life of an entity of supremacy and terror that discriminates against people based on their religion and ethnicity and kills them if it doesn't like them. Israel. So he's nothing now. Of course, the Palestinian Authority still will play a political role anyway on the Palestinian side. Like the meetings that are happening in Cairo, they will most likely include the PA Authority delegation. But even with them, in previous meetings that were held in Russia and China to try and bring the viewpoints closer, it was the Palestinian Authority always taking a step back because they didn't want anything to do with the right to resist. Although the other Palestinian factions showed a lot of leniency. And that, by the way, was said at the time by a representative of the PFLP, which isn't, Hamas or the PIJ, so that people wouldn't say, oh, yeah, it was Hamas saying that. It wasn't them. So, and he's upset about that. He's upset about the fact that he's not necessarily going to have a big role. Is the authority going to have a genuine change and a genuine reform in the organization of the PLO as an umbrella organization for all of the Palestinian political movements, that they refuse to allow the resistance in, although it represents the majority of the Palestinian people because of their ties with Israel? Or is he going to continue down the same path when the people he works for basically sacked him, in essence? What they're talking about in Israel, by the way, is dismantling the PA in the West Bank. Because so far we're talking about Gaza. We haven't even mentioned what's happening in the West Bank. They approved more expansion. They already ethnically cleansed 60,000 out of Jenin. They are expanding the squatters in the West Bank. They're stealing more land. And also, they're deploying a new division on the borders with Jordan. And one of the Israeli government officials the other day, he said that the West Bank and the East Bank belong to Israel. So in essence, Jordan too. The same Jordan that was helping Israel intercept Iranian missiles and putting Jordanians' lives at risk. They don't view anyone. They view the Americans as their slaves. They view anyone across the world as something to be used, as material. They don't view them as nothing, whether it's the Americans or the Europeans or anyone. And all of this propaganda and talk is just to try and buy more sympathy and, you know, these fake campaigns and stand with us and paying billions and trillions on social media and 7,000 a post. If you're on the right side of history, would you pay 7,000 a post? Or would you have an army of people volunteering for your cause? So that's the situation. If he does, though, understand that this didn't work, and he goes and speaks with everyone in Cairo, and both of them say, listen, let's have a formula, let's have an agreement here. We're going to go ahead, everything, we'll continue with everything that we can diplomatically, but you can't force a recognition of Israel and also denounce historical rights, like the right to the resist, like the right of the refugees to return. Because part of the reason that he didn't want to include the other Palestinian resistance movements in the PLO, the umbrella of Palestinian political organizations, is because they did not want to recognize an Israeli state. Well, has Israel recognized the Palestinian state? Why should you recognize before they recognize? And plus, having the 32 years that passed since the Oslo Accords in 1993 showed everyone that even if we only talk peace, and even if we denounce anything violent, if you want to call it violent even, which is a response, in essence, to constant aggression and state terrorism, if we want to go ahead with that and get this now, they expanded, they still don't give us rights, they still separate locations, they take over houses, they expel people from their houses, they demolish houses, they execute people in the streets, they kidnap them and have them under administrative detention with no legal support, no access to communication or food or water or anything, and they're abused and tortured to death in many cases. Is that the path that you want to lead us to? Because there was an argument now. There was an argument, some people, even in the Arab world, were saying, well, why doesn't the Palestinian side just give up and that's it? Just give it to Israel. Because the lives of the people are more important. That's what the argument. They're playing with this malicious Zionist propaganda. The lives are more important. At what cost? And how does that assure us that this vicious, vile enemy will not have another genocide? Did we not learn from the example of the West Bank that if they do want to expel, they will? They have plans. Netanyahu's main ally said, what we did in Gaza, we're going to do it to the West Bank. Just let us finish here first, because they don't have enough resources. They don't have enough manpower. They already reduced their ground troops to a third of their size 2 decades ago. So they don't have enough people to deploy in the West Bank. And American boots on ground were clearly a no-go from an American perspective. No other European country was willing to go and fight on behalf of Israel, because to them, that's a problem that they exported after World War II, right? Who was talking about the final solution to the question? Who was talking about that? To the Jewish question? Europe was talking about that. Then they implemented that. But go and die there. As in, don't come back and we don't want to come and fight for you. And they're trying to sell us this whole notion that, oh no, we're together and we're this and we're that. If you really support them so, if you love them so much, why didn't you go and fight in their, existential war then? Why didn't you do that if you love them so much and they are in need? Why are you leaving them to do that on their own? So there's multiple levels to this. But in the short term, although there are prospects for this succeeding somehow, and the Palestinian population that has suffered so much and has so much trauma to recover from for the next few years will get something, at least, that can happen, but it will not be solving the problem. Because the problem lies in the form of Israel being a supremacist entity of terror, being able to conduct these amounts of crimes and barbaric acts with no repercussions from the global institutions, from the ICJ, from the ICC, or from any global coalitions. And that will remain a problem up until that problem gets resolved.
It's running the colonization or this colonial enterprise as is at the end of 2025, and I always say this, is between Palestine and Pakistan. The occupation of Palestine is directly tied to the imperial imposition of order in Pakistan. Pakistan, as you know, has had a military rule-laden history. 60 years of its 80-year history has in some way or the other been the result or manipulated by military rule. Currently, the country is, at least on the face of it, has a facade of democracy, but it's a de facto military rule. Rights have been quashed. The courts have been completely destroyed and usurped by the executive. There are thousands of people that are in prison without charge. There are civilians have been tried in military courts, and specifically 2 provinces of the 4 in the country have been targeted with human rights abuses, disappearances, abductions, and even killings. One of these is the border province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which borders Afghanistan. And right now, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit, maybe you can ask me a question, we can talk about this as well. We are seeing
Absolutely.
We're seeing what is happening in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, in Gaza. But there's also a bigger conflict that is brewing now between Afghanistan and Pakistan on one side, between India and Pakistan on the other. And there seems to be American intervention of some sort, that the Americans are, entertaining the idea of military dictatorship in Pakistan. Donald Trump hosted a luncheon for Pakistan's military ruler, Asim Munir, a few months ago in June, end of May or June, I think. And the Americans are quite interested in exploring minerals and precious stones and gems in Pakistan. And the Pakistanis, allegedly, according to a Financial Times report, have offered a port to the Americans in Balochistan, close to where the Chinese are operating. So it's a huge mess. What are your
a couple of questions would arise here. I think number one, and you would be much better positioned to give a bit more feedback about that. Why are the tensions happening on these borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan when many of the people on both sides of these borders are actually related in many cases and belong to the same tribes? What's causing that even?
Well, this is a primary question, right? And it has to do with the US war on terror in Afghanistan. The US invasion, if you can call it, of Afghanistan, or the war in Afghanistan, was the longest American war in its history. It was longer than Vietnam. The Americans stayed in Afghanistan for 20 years. And a lot of their presence in Afghanistan had to do with complicity of the Pakistan military leadership, which was at that time led by the former Pakistan dictator Pervez Musharraf. So in 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, the Americans called up the Pakistanis and called up Musharraf and told him, listen, you're either with us or against us. And Musharraf, to the detriment, long-term detriment of Pakistan, chose to be with the Americans. What did that mean? It meant that the Americans made the Pakistan military basically a mercenary force to carry out its own ideas, its own operations in Pakistan's then federally administered tribal areas. As you rightly mentioned, Pakistan and Afghanistan share the longest border with each other, and they have tribes on either side. For example, half a tribe in Afghanistan or the tribal areas there, and the Pakistani side in Waziristan, North, South Waziristan, so on and so forth. And these borders are porous. So people can go from one side to the other. When the Americans entered Afghanistan, it was the beginning of an insurgency. They drove out the Taliban, and many of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda crossed the border into Pakistan's tribal areas and sought refuge there. From there, they started an insurgency, and the Pakistanis have gone on record to admit this as well, where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were providing a backup of sorts from the Pakistani side, and they were enabling the launching of attacks against the Americans on the Afghan side. The Americans then compelled the Pakistanis to send their military into these tribal areas, starting in 2002. And that was the beginning of military operations in these areas. But you have to remember, because there's such long-standing ties between these two, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the tribal areas there, what came out was that the Pakistanis basically were turning a blind eye or couldn't do much. They were carrying out military operations on one side, but then they had to basically get these people on board as well. That gave birth to the idea of the good Taliban and the bad Taliban. The good Taliban, in the Pakistani perspective, were the ones that were fighting against the Americans in Afghanistan. The bad Taliban were the ones that started fighting against the Pakistanis after they entered into these tribal areas because of the Americans. And the Americans paid the Pakistanis handsomely. They gave up to $22 billion, according to the Americans themselves, as part of something called the Coalition Support Fund. The Coalition Support Fund from the Americans for the Pakistanis to be part of this global war on terror essentially made the Pakistanis a mercenary force. And then we had instances where the Americans were then targeting the Pakistanis directly, leading up to, in fact, Osama bin Laden being caught in Abbottabad. Now, you can argue what happened there. What was OBL doing in Abbottabad? Who got him there? Were the Americans involved? Were the Pakistani military involved?
Was it him? Was it an actual thing? Was it real? I mean, I have a lot of questions personally.
There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions.
To add one thing, if I may, in relation to the Pakistan, at the time, many were saying that Pakistan was playing a two-side game. Is that true? They were pretending to be fighting against them to get that money, but really and truly they weren't very effective. Like the Haqqani network, for example, that was operating from within Pakistan, and now he's in effect in the leadership of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and also removed from the supposed terror list that the United States has. So he was being protected. Were those tribes protecting them, or did Pakistan also turn a blind eye?
Well, the Pakistanis and the Haqqani network and the patron of the Haqqani network, Jalaluddin Haqqani, were in bed with the Americans against the Soviets in the 1980s. So the Soviet Union, when it occupied Afghanistan beginning in the late 1970s, basically opened up an opportunity for the Pakistani generals to liaise with the Americans and invite them in. And they said that we will fight your war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And the people that Pakistan basically put forward were these tribal people, or from the tribal areas, like the Haqqanis, like Jalaluddin Haqqani, who became a war hero in the Soviet times. And including, for example, Ahmad Shah Massoud, who became a leader of the Northern Alliance. So all of these, or Hikmatyar, who was paid by the ISI as well. So the Americans, through the Saudis, would give the Pakistanis money, and then the Pakistanis would give this money to their favorite freedom fighters, like Jalaluddin Haqqani, like Hikmat Yar, like to an extent even Ahmad Shah Massoud. So this relationship goes back 40, 45, 50 years. And it's not easy for Pakistan to just say, okay, you know what, the relationship is over. In fact, a lot of the madrasas from which this new army of Allah was created against the Soviet Union were in Pakistan, were in places like Akola Khatak, where the seminary, Haqqaniya seminary, was producing thousands of graduates who would then go on to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And then this continued, because once the relationship is set, once the Americans came in after 9/11, these same seminaries were sending their students to fight against the Americans. You were mentioning the Haqqanis. I've interviewed Anas Haqqani, who was in Bagram for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and he was tortured by the Americans there. He's the youngest brother. His elder brother, Sirajuddin Haqqani, so basically there were 8 or 9 brothers. Most of these brothers were killed in drone strikes or bomb attacks by the Americans or their proxies. So, and basically the Haqqanis then had to employ the use of martyrdom brigades, their suicide squads, to turn the tide against the Americans starting from 2004 onwards. And allegedly, they had the patronage of some levels of the Pakistan military, allegedly, even though the Pakistan military denies this. But this double game, as you call it, and it was a double game, got on with the Pakistanis, leading up to something called Salala. There was an attack in Salala, I think, at the end, not at the tail end of the American occupation, but around the time that Osama bin Laden was killed. And dozens of Pakistani soldiers were killed by American Apache helicopters and American soldiers on the Pakistan side. So this deep level of mistrust between the Pakistanis and the Americans has persisted because both the Americans and the Pakistanis have been playing a double game. It's a transactional relationship. There is no strategy or long-term benefit involved. You pay the Pakistanis and you get what you want. And then the Pakistanis play their own games because they feel a sense of betrayal. Oh my God, why aren't they giving us more? Right? So it's about money and it's about the military. Pakistan right now is in the grips of arguably the worst military dictatorship, which is not a military dictatorship because on the face of it, it's still a democracy. But on the inside, all state institutions, all democratic institutions, including human rights, has been quelled, has been destroyed. And interestingly, with the patronage of both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, because the Biden administration turned a blind eye because of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. It allegedly sponsored the removal of Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who is in prison now for over 2 years. Nobody's seen him except his lawyers and the court proceedings that are being held in jail. This is being done at the acquiescence and the silent agreement of the Americans, allegedly, because the Americans have not said a single thing about human rights and human rights violations. And what is interesting is that Imran Khan was put in prison in August 2023. The October 7th attacks happened 2 months later. Pakistan's position on the October 7th attacks has been, as you can see, because they nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. If you remember, for ending the war between the 4-day war or skirmish between India and Pakistan. So the military junta is in bed with the Americans. The American deep state, specifically, allegedly, the CIA and the State Department under Marco Rubio, are in cahoots with the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis were providing with the Americans allegedly mortar shells and artillery shells in Ukraine to fight against the Russians. Imran Khan was removed because he landed in Russia on the day that the Russians invaded Ukraine, which was then used as an excuse by the military leadership then, General Bajwa, former chief of army staff, to basically tell the Americans, listen, we are with you, as in the Pakistan army is with you, America. It is these fundamental anti-American politicians like Imran Khan. Look, and he went on the day. So this game, this manipulation has been going on for a long time. And both the Americans and the Pakistanis are okay with it because the Americans want to deal with a strong man. They don't want to deal with this democratic BS of, oh, pass a law, do this, do that. Their interests trump every consideration for human rights, for democracy, for whatever in places like Pakistan. Because they probably, I think, view Pakistanis as savages, as something that can be controlled and manipulated and suppressed. But Pakistan is 250 million people. And Pakistan is the only nuclear armed state, a Muslim state in the world. So Pakistan is a very, very important country. It has a largely young population, but it is also a country under extreme subjugation of American American-backed colonial designs that are being carried out by a military junta that is extremely aggressive, extremely predatory, and extremely subjugative of the Pakistani population. And what you see in Pakistan with these terrorist attacks, with what's happening with the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, the skirmishes, is a result of the military junta's complete disregard for human rights, for democracy, for the rule of law, complete subjugation of anyone for Gaza, for example, there are people lying in prison for months now because they were protesting against Israel and for the Palestinians in Gaza. And this all has the backing of the military junta. In fact,
in prison in Pakistan, you mean?
Yes, in Pakistan. In Pakistan,
so the escalation that's now happening on the border, you're telling me as well, is related to these people resisting the military rule from within Pakistan, but that expanded to Afghanistan. And for whose interest would they want to go against Afghanistan then?
There are a few things that have happened here, Mahmood. In the past year, the Pakistan military caught the alleged mastermind of the Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul. The Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul happened in the last week of the American withdrawal, in which 13 American soldiers were killed at the entrance or the back entrance of the Kabul airport. This is around August 2021. The Pakistanis caught the alleged mastermind for the Abbey Gate a few months ago and handed him over to the Trump administration. Trump, in his first State of the Union address, thanked Pakistan for handing over this terrorism suspect. Pakistan's military leader right now, General Asim Munir, had very close ties with the former CENTCOM chief, General Eric Michael Kurilla, who stepped down a few months ago. Yeah, and Kurilla was also Israel's favorite general. Kurilla promoted Pakistan's military dictator as a man who is against terrorism. Because whenever you talk about the Pakistani military and the Americans have a set framework in their mind, Pakistan military will fight our terror wars. Starting from against the Soviets to against the Americans themselves, the Taliban themselves. So the Pakistani military has carried out a series of steps inside Pakistan over the past year, including the removal of tens of thousands of Afghan nationals who were born in Pakistan because their forefathers escaped or grandparents escaped during the Soviet wars. They were born here. They don't have Pakistani citizenship or passports. They deported them back to Afghanistan, creating even more resentment. And they started to create a hard border. Now, because the border region and obviously the KP province is kind of complicated here, and I think it'll be beneficial for your viewers and my viewers. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is arguably the only province in Pakistan which still has a democratic mandated government. In the elections in February 2024, there was mass rigging, according to the Commonwealth report, which was also suppressed. The only province where rigging or there wasn't a mandate theft was Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa borders Afghanistan. People in KP have relations with people in Afghanistan. So a crackdown has been underway essentially in KP for the past year against political dissidents, which has now spread into this conflict that has emerged because all of these things are tied. Imran Khan, at the time when the Americans were leaving, made a few controversial statements. He said, we cannot have war with Afghanistan. We cannot have war with our own people. But right now, there's a military operation underway since March in which Pakistani civilians, including children, have been killed in drone attacks allegedly carried out by Pakistan's military. The terminology that is being used is the same as Israel was using in Gaza. And if you look at the terminology the Pakistanis are using against the Afghans, it's the same terminology, the same mindset that these are terrorists, that if you give shelter to a terrorist, there'll be collateral damage. So there are a lot of parallels that are going on. The root of these parallels connects to the Americans and American patronage of both these systems of oppression, be it in Afghanistan or Pakistan in this instance, or be it in Israel or the Palestinian occupied territories.
It's so interesting. What do you think is coming out of it, though? That's the more dangerous question. I mean, the last thing you'd want is a war now between these two countries. Even when we speak about military dictatorships or internal corruption or anything of the sort, there's also another dimension to look at, which is the greater geopolitical scope. And also the interest of the United States having an establishment there against China, or also potentially, and again, I'd be interested to hear what you have to think about that, the promise that the Iranian general of the IRGC at the time mentioned that if Israel attacks Iran with a nuclear bomb, Pakistan will drop a nuclear bomb on Israel. How are all of these linked? What's the reality behind them? And do you think it will reach to an escalation where both countries will go at war with each other, knowing really and truly the impossibility of defeating Afghanistan? I mean, Afghanistan, we call it in Arabic, Maqbaratul Ghuza, the graveyard of empires. It has been known in history as a land that cannot be occupied. The Soviets failed, the Americans failed. What can Pakistan do? What are they going to go and occupy Afghanistan? What are they going to do? What's the outcome out of it? What do you think of all of that?
A few things here. I was talking about terminology. I just want to make a very quick point. The situation is such that there was a mandate theft in Pakistan. And if you raise a voice against it, you are labeled as a anti-state sympathizer, either an Afghan Fitna al-Khawarij or a PTI Imran Khan supporter. Anyone who raises his voice against the subjugation and the military dictatorship in force in Pakistan right now is accused of the same way that Israel would accuse someone of being a Hamas sympathizer or a Hamas supporter or anti-Semitic. So the terminologies are very similar here. 45%, I wouldn't say, about 45 million Pakistanis are Pashto speakers. 60% of Afghanistan speaks Pashto. Pakistan has 5 different languages. Or actually, it could be more if you count the dialects. There's Saraiki, there's Punjabi, there's Pashto, there's Sindhi, there's Balochi, there's Hindko, and so on and so forth. The majority of Pakistanis are Punjabi speakers. Punjab is the largest province. 60% of Punjab is accounts for 60% of the Pakistani population. What has happened over the past few years, and this has been patronized by the military leadership as well, is that we want to frame anyone who opposes the military junta, and especially if they come from a KP province, as Afghans, as hidden Afghans who are against the Pakistani state. And this is also playing out, by the way, in the whole Afghanistan-Pakistan dynamic. Because in KP province, you have people that say, we don't want war with Afghanistan. They are automatically accused of being, oh, see, there's a traitor right there. He's an Afghan sympathizer. And because he's an Afghan sympathizer, Imran Khan is also anti-state. So there's a lot of juxtaposition. There's a lot of hearsay and a lot of BS that is put forward just for resistance or resisting this. Another thing, Israel has nuclear weapons. Pakistan has nuclear weapons. You were mentioning Afghanistan. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia just recently signed a mutual defense pact. What that means is that if one country is attacked, the other country will respond to it. And this happened right after Israel carried out strikes in Qatar, where they targeted Hamas leadership, which was meeting for negotiations. So the myth that was spread in Pakistan is, look, Israel is attacking countries in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are getting into this agreement because of Israel. Because Pakistan can come to Saudi Arabia's defense if it is attacked by Israel. Now, Israel has never attacked Saudi Arabia. Israel has not even, in fact, threatened Saudi Arabia. And the entire Saudi defense architecture is based on an American defense architecture. They've got Patriots, they've got American fighter jets, bombers, you name it. In fact, up until the 90s, they also had the largest American base. So any pact or any agreement between the Pakistanis and the Saudis, especially based on defense, cannot happen without the approval of the Americans. And if the Americans are involved, you can bet, be sure that it is not targeted against Israel. It is targeted against possibly Iran, but also China. Because America, as
Do you think that they can have this much of a compromise after China arms the Pakistani military so heavily, and they have proven to be so effective against India, and they have visibly a very good relationship, and they're close to China, and they know what they're capable of? And also, they apparently also have closer ties with Iran too. As a matter of fact, I heard a conversation between some of the Pakistani officials and the Saudi officials in somewhat of a reassurance to Iran that it wasn't intended against them. What do you think about that? And of course, in general, there could be a viewing here that, well, they did it as a surprise, but the Americans would have known somehow. Now, were they the architects behind it? Were they the engineers? That's a separate story. But can they go that far for something against China, potentially, that's closer to their borders and also arms them heavily and has a very long trade with them, and geographically, and the proximity makes way more sense than the United States? Are they willing to go that far, you think?
Anything for survival. The Pakistanis, and especially the Pakistani, because it's not a representative country, it's a divided country, and it has a history of military rule. Military interests trump the people's interests. You are absolutely right. China is our neighbor. It has given Pakistan weapons, but the Pakistanis are also offering the Americans ports right next to where the Chinese have been building, for example, the Gwadar port or something called the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So because the regime in Pakistan right now, after stealing the mandate, completely destroying the courts, is so alienated, is so isolated among the people, the Pakistanis don't trust the leadership, the military at this moment. The majority of Pakistanis are against what the military is doing politically, in political interventions, and security-wise. 2024-2025 was the worst year on record in the past decade for Pakistani security personnel and attacks on Pakistani security personnel. When the military finds itself in a position where a dictatorial figure, be it Musharraf, be it Ziaul Haq, or be it Asim Munir, tries to usurp power, you see an uptick in these attacks, and you see a rush towards the Americans. Please give us money. What can we offer you for you to engage with us? When the Chinese give you money, they give it to you in terms of loan, and China still doesn't have the same capacity to play these games that the Americans have had. And the Americans have been playing these games in these parts for decades. But that's a very important question. Why would the Pakistanis go back to the Americans when the Chinese are right there? And this is a question I'm sure the Chinese are also asking. And in their minds, they probably say that because Pakistan plays all sides, it plays a double game, how can you trust Pakistan? And the fact is, you cannot trust the Pakistani leadership. You cannot trust the current Pakistani military junta that has taken over control of all aspects of the state, all organs of the state, and is inviting the Americans, look, we can give you minerals, rare earth minerals. We'll create a port in Pasni. You can bring your minerals here, process it, put it on a ship, and off to the US. The Chinese have seen this very closely. And now even the Chinese are hedging their bets. because the Chinese realize that Pakistan is not a reliable partner. They are investing in Afghanistan. They're investing in Iran. In fact, there are talks that the Chinese might even help Iran rehabilitate the Chabahar port to bypass the Gwadar port that they were building with the Pakistanis, because you can't trust the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis want to attack you, and then they'll give you the best words, they'll be your best friends, but then they'll also attack you. And they'll do the same thing with their own people, the leadership, that is. So again, you can't trust the Pakistanis. The Chinese probably don't trust the Pakistanis. There are a lot of interests that are involved in this area strategically: India, Iran, the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz. And then you have the Pakistanis that are playing all these double games, including offering or nominating Trump for the Nobel Prize that he didn't win.
And in short, to summarize, where do you think it's going to go after all of this escalation? Do you think it's going to reach an all-out war with them? Between Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Listen, there cannot be an all-out war in the same sense, because the Americans were the biggest military force in the world, right? Still are. They spent $1 trillion in a year on their defense. In Afghanistan, through some estimates, the Americans spent $2.3 trillion over 20 years, with the most sophisticated weaponry, with the best arsenal in the world, you name it, with Pakistan supplies coming in from Pakistan, NATO supply lines, drones, whatever. And even then, a ragtag army of people in their slippers with guns defeated the Americans. The Pakistanis are a huge superpower, or regional superpower, compared to Afghanistan. They've got an air force. They get military supplies primarily from the Chinese, but they also have American fighter jets. And the Pakistanis have fought an insurgency. 70 to 80,000 Pakistanis were killed in the tribal areas in KP, in Pakistan, in suicide attacks and bombings from 2002 to 2014. And then they had to basically pull back and say, okay, you know what, you can't fight your way through anything. If Pakistan decides to go to war with Afghanistan, or these skirmishes escalate, you will open up a huge front in Pakistan, because the language is the same, the people are the same. And there are a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of suppression inside Pakistan as well. We're talking about Afghanistan right now. In Balochistan, there's an insurgency. The terror groups are attacking daily. They're killing 3 to 4 to 5 Pakistani soldiers. And the Pakistanis have been fighting an insurgency there since 2007. 8,000 Balochis have been disappeared. And this is right south of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. So if you want to expand the war is expanding inside your country, inside Pakistan. So if they want to attack Afghanistan, it'll spread this violence even more, even further.
And all I can see here is really neo-colonial interests being met in having more havoc in these countries, and then potentially funding perhaps somehow both sides like they have in different wars. But then they would also destabilize both countries. I mean, Afghanistan is trying to re-emerge out, get more recognition. Could it be perhaps that the United States now got some of their final prisoners of war from Afghanistan? They say, okay, we don't care. Maybe they can go into another war. And then Pakistan would get dragged into this, which doesn't seem to be an ideal case for anyone, really. Neither for the people in both countries, nor at a geopolitical level, I assume, in the Asian and West Asian region. But we'll keep, of course, monitoring that situation. I think we'll wrap it up here, Ali. It was really interesting speaking with you about these two parts, and we need to hopefully continue take it again sometime soon.
For sure. Thank you so much, Mahmood. I know you spoke a lot. I'm not used to speaking.
Thank you so much.
But I appreciate the time that you took out.
Thank you.
And we will do it again.
You.
Thank you, guys. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Everyone. Do like, subscribe, and share this content. Mahmood Odi, he's right there. We'll put the link. I think you're also streaming this live.
Yeah, also to my viewers, to those who are viewing me on my channel, this is actually Ali's show. Please do go and subscribe to his channel. And I live streamed it on my channel, but you will see it also set on Ali's channel. Let Ali show you. So please make sure to follow him. And hopefully in the future, we'll have some more collaborations as well. And greetings, of course, to both my channel viewers and Ali's channel viewers. Ali, it was really a pleasure speaking with you, brother. And thank you to viewers on both sides for participating and for sharing your thoughts.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye. Salam.